Hey, what's up? This is Silas. This is
Stephen Kirschner.
We're back for the next part in the You Are What You Consume series. And as I said in the last video, this time we're going to watch the documentary on... you can explain.
Well, it's Anthony Bourdain when he went to the French Laundry with Eric Ripert, Michael Ruhlman, and Scott Bryan from Veritas.
And who are those people again?
So Eric Ripert is the chef of Le Bernardin. That's one of the top restaurants in New York City. 3 Michelin stars. If you watched the last video, we went through the discussion of what Michelin stars are. It's the top seafood place, actually, in fact. That's in Midtown. It's actually not too far from where I live. Veritas has, I want to say, 1 Michelin star. From what I hear, it's not as good. When Scott Bryan was there, they said it was really on point. It used to be one of Bourdain's favorite restaurants in the city. I haven't been there myself, but I heard it's changed a bit. And then Michael Ruhlman is actually a food writer who also co-authored the French Laundry Cookbook. So,
okay. And so what we're going to do is we're going to watch this documentary, and as I've mentioned, my general theme of this is you are what you eat, in the sense that both the physical and the mental sense.
Yes.
So we're both going to be discussing the food that they're eating here, and also
perhaps maybe some of the origins behind it, about what inspired Thomas Keller to come up with these dishes and so on.
And try to think about different ways that this shows how information changes and how people value different information, take in certain things. Because as you see, there's going to be some...
Well, I was going to say how people built on what was created in the past, too. Those old French classical dishes, how they can be reinterpreted in newer ways, where, in general, the flavors are there, but the presentation has been radically overhauled, as well as... Sometimes even the flavors improved upon, too.
Yeah.
Depending.
And I think in this sense, what I'd like you guys to keep in mind is think about the ingredients and things that are mentioned in here and that you see in here. And these are things that you technically have access to. Most of you watching this video will have access to pretty much all these ingredients. Mm-hmm. It's not like they're going out and getting some...
They didn't go to Mars to harvest.
Yeah. These are things that you can go to most of your local grocery stores and find these things, or have them delivered from somewhere, and just look at the general combinations that they take something where you're just making maybe potatoes and you just get potatoes, chop the potatoes, and put some onions in them, and then see the difference. What makes the chef here do what he does with the basic things, and what makes you do what you do with the basic things.
Well, I was going to say, too, and I think he actually mentions this in his cookbook, that even if you can't afford some of those fancier items, like let's say you can't afford Kobe beef, you can still do it with a more grass-fed, farm-raised steak. It won't be as good overall, but you can carry out the execution of the dish. Again, it won't be as good. Like maybe the fat content won't be as good. The steak won't be as well marbled, but the overall idea is similar. If you want to just do a cheaper version of it, so the technique is still there.
Okay, so jump back to the start of this French Laundry thing. There's going to be a link below to a location where you can watch this, and we're just going to skip through the starting part mostly, because the starting part kind of introduces who Anthony Bourdain is and introduces some of the chefs, and most of the video will be breaking down once they actually arrive at the restaurant and have that experience. So yeah, jumping in.
Here we go.
Welcome to my world. 2 escargot, pâté, frisé, 2 green salads. Okay, man, it's us here. Lamb chop, steak frites. Shouldn't you be doing something?
Is he still a chef?
He doesn't run a kitchen anymore. This was the last place he was executive chef of. It's called Les Halles. It's still around.
Tastes and smells are my memories.
That was his last
I'm in search of new ones. So I'm leaving New York City and hope to have a few epiphanies around the world. And I'm willing to go to some lengths to do that. I'm looking for extremes of emotion and experience. I'll try anything. I'll risk everything. I have nothing to lose. Before I came to San Francisco, I thought it was all hippies and vegetarians. But it's not like that at all.
It actually is, though.
I haven't been yet, so
don't tell. It's a horrible place. No, I'm kidding.
I'm going to the mountaintop. I'm going to eat at the world-famous French Laundry in the Napa Valley, about an hour north of here. It is my lifelong dream to taste the food of Thomas Keller, the owner and chef of the French Laundry. He's the man. There's nobody who can touch him. I can't even describe how much I'm looking forward to this meal. My reservation isn't until tomorrow, so while I anxiously await guaranteed bliss, I gotta eat. I just want to keep it simple and light in anticipation of tomorrow's
Yeah, San Francisco's an interesting place.
Do you want to play all this, or do you want to skip over it? Because this isn't the restaurant. These are just the other places.
Yeah. There's durian ice cream. There's a durian ice cream here that they talk about. You can tell us about your experience with that. I know you mentioned that in the video before. Cause
if you go to the Chinatown Ice Cream Factory, obviously, in Chinatown, you can have durian ice cream. It's interesting. This woman I know I met through Meetup, she described durian as a cross between mango and onion, and I was like, I'd say that's pretty accurate. Now, if you have it in the ice cream, it's a little mellowed out because there's a lot of cream and sugar, but if you have the fresh fruit, it definitely tastes like that. Yeah. I couldn't eat that much of it. I could have maybe a few bites, and it just started disagreeing with my stomach. I was like, I can't eat anymore.
There's an odd situation where something like oysters, people say oysters are normally considered some kind of high-level cuisine, but it's literally just oysters. It's literally just something they get out of the ocean and crack open and give it to you.
Well, I mean, I'm sure you know about how lobsters were originally fed to slaves, but they said when the Pilgrims landed in New England, they said apparently there were lobsters crawling along the beaches, but then because people ate them so much, they started to become rarer, and then it became a delicacy.
Oh,
whereas before it used to be, again, you just go along the beach, okay, catch one, eat it. So it's the whole scarcity. It's like with diamonds. I mean, you can create a diamond in a lab, but people have the impression they're rare, so because of that, they're willing to pay a lot of money for them.
Yeah.
And plus, there's the De Beers diamond cartel controlling it, but yeah, that's a conversation for another time.
And there's a thing with that. I think there's always going to be some kind of correlation between quality and rarity.
Yes.
Where no matter what gets to the situation, like right now we're seeing the amount of people, like you'll see some of the dishes that this person is making in this video, and it gets to the point where the amount of people that can do something to this high level of skill or ingenuity is always going to be a rarity. I think if you ever got to the point where most of the population could cook like he can, there will be somebody else on the bell curve, like on the other side, that's doing like some kind of gastronomic, like some kind of like micro machines to chef
something we haven't even conceived of yet. Who knows?
So
I mean,
I think that'll always that bell curve will always just keep moving across. And right now, I'd say your average chef at your average restaurant would be maybe, let's say there's a bell curve like this.
Yes.
They'd be on this side, and this guy's like all the way at the end. Max Kellerman, is that his name? Or
Thomas Keller.
Thomas Keller. Okay. Yes, Max Kellerman. What is that from? It's like Max Kellerman Headroom.
Yeah.
Anyway, so right here, I thought this was kind of an interesting part we should kind of go over. It's where they meet. But one thing I like about this is they show how he's very in touch with the food, with how the food is obtained, knowing about the farms. I say this thing where I think it's still accurate, is you could probably convince a lot of people on the street that onions grow on trees like apples did.
Yeah.
You can be like, yeah, you actually pick them out. So I think it's good to be just a little more familiar with both your food and how your food is created, where it comes from, the process that goes through that, and not just what you consume food-wise, but also media-wise. Understand who is planting that farm of information, understand how they deliver that information to you, why you get those kind of apples, or why you get that kind of news story versus a different one.
And if you read the French Laundry book too, it's interesting because he cites individual purveyors. He talks about, we get lobsters from this woman in Maine. She sends them that day. They're covered in ice, so the lobsters go to sleep, as it were. They don't sit in the tank and get stagnant. There are other things too. He talks about getting the hearts of palm from Hawaii. He talks about different fish. It's really interesting. Just the close connections he has with all his purveyors and how they're his friends pretty much, and how foie gras he gets either from the Hudson Valley Foie Gras Farm, which isn't too far from where I grew up, and there used to be one in California too, but it was shut down.
Yeah, that's just to show it doesn't really matter that people are working together in concert. People do that. We do that. When people are trying to say, okay, look at these relationships between people, it's about the end result. You know, it's not saying that relationships between people are bad. It's not bad that certain reporters or certain media sources have certain relationships with certain people. Or you can say, okay, this restaurant or this organization has a leg up because they know all these people.
Yeah.
Like, it might be hard for us, let's say we want to start a restaurant, to come in and meet all the people that he knows, but it's not impossible, nor is it a negative thing that he knows them.
Here are those guys.
Yeah.
Michael.
Co-author of the French Laundry Cookbook, a writer I really admire. Eric Ripert is the chef of the 4-star restaurant Le
4 New York Times stars, 3 Michelin.
Scott Bryant, chef owner.
I don't know what Scott Bryan's doing these
My
days.
favorite restaurant in New York. It is beautiful.
Oh God, look at this. It looks so much like France. It's unbelievable. Even the trees.
When was this filmed again?
I would have to look. I think it was like earlier 2000s or something.
It's just strange how old it seems. Somebody was like, "This was in the '80s." I'm like, "Yeah." It's just,
Well, if you notice, a lot of these guys have gray hair now. You know?
yeah.
One meal of your life.
But even just the quality of the film, this just changes how our expectations have changed.
True.
And it matches with a lot of things. I think that's why it's good to talk about the food and the media in the sense, which is, think about your access to different restaurants today versus access to different restaurants just a decade ago. Well, 20 years ago.
Well, that's what I've said. I mean, a place like this didn't even exist 20 years ago, and what was considered top back then today would be decent.
Yeah. And now also look at information. Now a news story happens and people are like demanding, I must know who did this, how many people have died, how many people are affected, where it came from. You're expecting that in a day when just a decade ago.
You got your morning paper, and then you had to wait till the next day.
16-year-old girl on the way to her first date.
Yeah, it's funny. I know someone who went here. They said, that's all there is in this one town is this restaurant. It's just that and vineyards for miles around. It's kind of cool in a way, but I don't know if he's still doing it, but he was working on a boutique hotel where people could stay who were going to eat at the restaurant. It's kind of cool, yeah. I don't know what the progress.
Okay.
Salmon tartare scooped on top, like an ice cream cone. Keller likes his food to evoke memories. You don't hear a lot of chefs talking like that, playing with magical forces like memory as if they were ingredients. I didn't see this cone on the menu at Polly Ann's.
Okay, so before we get to, he's speaking about the menu here. Is there a menu at this restaurant?
Typically, there's a tasting menu. I don't know how frequently it changes. I don't know if it's daily or I think to a certain degree it's seasonal, but certain dishes are subject to change. See, I don't know because the thing is I've worked in different places. Some places will have, I know like there are a lot of these farm and table places downtown where every day there's a different menu. They just go to the market, buy things, and create things. Other places will have the same menu for a season and then change it at the end of the season. Other people will do something in between where they have most of the dishes for the season, then they have a special here and there. Mm-hmm. It depends on their preference. Now, I don't know with him because he has so many dishes. I don't know how often it changes. Like, for example, I looked at the per se menu recently, and they still have the coffee and donuts, which I first learned about when I looked at this book, almost 10 years ago. So there's certain things I think they keep because they know people will ask for them or whatever, but then there are other things that they keep tweaking or changing or they just, I think they want to play around with things. But then again, if there's a certain dish where people say, oh, I have to have this when I come here, they're going to keep that around.
Okay.
So I think like the salmon cornet, I think they still have that because that's one of his signature dishes.
And you want to describe that to us? I mean, it looks pretty good. So
it's the salmon tartare. It's raw salmon, usually the belly. It's cut up. Inside is a red onion creme fraiche. Creme fraiche in French means fresh cream. It's similar to sour cream, but a bit lighter in consistency, a slight tang to it. And of course, it's modeled after an ice cream cone. His next Keller's comment here coming up, I think, is very insightful. You want to play the video?
Tar scooped on top, like an ice cream cone. Keller likes his food to evoke memories. You don't hear a lot of chefs talking like that, playing with magical forces like memory as if they were ingredients. I didn't see this cone on the menu at Polly Ann's.
Here we have a sesame cornet with marinated salmon tartare. Inside the cone, of red onion creme fraiche.
Great, thank you. Like, you make you feel like you want to eat them raw, like, wow, really, truly inspired by Baskin Robbins cone.
Most food is an evolution or inspiration. There's very little creativity in anything. The cornet is about as close to a creation as I got. But it also was inspired by an ice cream cone. So, there you go.
Cool.
Okay.
I think that's a brilliant insight because the thing is a lot of you'll see this as the video goes along, but a lot of his pairings, they're things that have been done before, carrots and peas. I'm trying to think what else does he have? Like surf and turf. I don't know. I forget if they have any of those dishes in here, but it's in his book. But a lot of those are classical pairings, but it's like, so I think the general idea is the combination of flavors are there. It's just a matter of how you present it, how you interpret it, and so on. And that's kind of his point that, okay, this is a very interesting take on salmon tartare, but then again, it's also based off an ice cream cone, so it's not entirely original. And he admits that like he didn't make this stuff up completely out of the blue. He took it from somewhere else, but at the same time, he put his own touch on it.
Yeah, I think there's two things to take from that, both being in creative fields across the board, when you're doing entertainment, when you're doing media, when you're communicating ideas to people. How much change or how much...
Yeah, how much is original,
how much
really?
is something
Yeah.
new? What do you need to do to make something new, to do something in a different way? And I think most of society doesn't necessarily have a lot of brand new things, but in a lot of situations, you kind of have a situation where I think many people are doing, let's say this is the kind of thing, you have like 4 or 8 different people doing different things in a similar field, and then somebody does something that's a lot better, then everybody kind of squeezes towards that thing, and then from there that branches off to another 8 things. So I think you see that kind of thing where it's like, okay, he opens up here. I think there's probably a reason he opens up with the thing he considers to be most out of his creation. So it kind of shows you that, look, this is something that he's done with this, and then the other things are more adjustments. So I think a lot of situations...
And he even cites in his book, he cites, for example, you'll see later, there's a salmon chop. He goes, oh, I learned this from David Burke. That's a prominent chef in the city. The brioche recipe he learned from Jean-Louis Paladon, who's considered one of the French masters. So he even admits that these aren't my ideas out of the blue, but I feel I sort of compared and contrasted who had the best ideas with these dishes or these particular presentations, and how can I take that, but in a way where I integrate the best aspects of everything into my own creation.
Yeah.
I think that was the overall theme. It's the same thing with philosophy. I mean, there's no philosopher that I agree with 100% on anything, but you try and pick and choose, okay, where was this person right? Where was that person right? How can I take enough from each person where it becomes my belief system?
Yeah. I think this is like a situation you can say gastro appropriation. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, I think it's a positive thing too.
I mean, everyone is influenced by somebody else.
Yeah.
Music too. I mean, nothing...
I mean, even when you're eating, when you're actually eating, what are you doing? You're calorie appropriating from that food to yourself, and if you don't do that,
I hadn't thought of it like that.
Yeah, if you don't participate in this caloric appropriation, you would not exist. So yeah, okay, back in.
This cornet is so playful and so tasty. I gotta wonder what's next.
This is a roasted walla walla shallot soup, braised scallop belly soup. We have the Maine lobster consomme,
Ravioli and stuff.
fishy swan.
Cold potato leek soup.
Here that I can't identify.
If there's any meal you want to pause on
Start playing detective.
and explain more, just hit the space button.
Sure.
It should be pointed out that there are 4 of us at the table, and that all 4 of us are getting a completely different tasting menu of about 20 courses, which if you're a chef will make you shudder with fear and terror to even contemplate.
Of course, I'm thinking world of goodness, because it would be much easier for the kitchen to do. Okay, send out the voices of pearls to the foretop. Who would deliberately choose to?
And that's just what's crazy to think about it. Like they say, I mean, 20 courses for them, that's 80 courses. Just think about how hard it is to come up with 1 or 2 of those and have 80 just completely different. I mean, you even saw those soups. I mean, consomme, that's a clarified broth, essentially. You had the vichyssoise, that's a cold potato leek soup. You had that scallop soup. It's just like even those preparations are all complete. They're still soups, but their preparations are all completely different. And then it's just the level of just how creative and how versatile he is with all these different ingredients that he's able to present them in such a great fashion.
And then even the added oddness to this is the fact that some of the things he's doing is really high level, yet it would take him shorter to do these things, the crew that he has and the things that he has, than it would be for us to do even the basic steps for it, just because of familiarity with it. And I think a lot of people need to realize that the levels of expertise and experience it takes to do some of the things you consider relatively basic, even just calling an electrician to your house, the person finds a stud, finds where the wires are, pulls them out. Whereas we could do that, but it might take 3 or 4 hours of going online and finding the things, finding the right tools, where he would kind of not intuit it, but have some experience level for it.
Well, it's interesting too because some of these high-end restaurants, just the amount of staff they have on, like Netto, where I work, the kitchen, it's usually 3-4 guys on. What a lot of these places, like I know at Danielle, that's one of the top in New York, I think they have something like 14-15 people upstairs, and they have a prep kitchen of like 60 cooks or something.
Wow.
But that's the thing, because you need all these people to craft all these components, and they have a lot of interns, they have a lot of stagiaires, the French term. They have people who just come in and say, I want to learn how to do this, so they just come in, they just do all this stuff. They'll just cut up leeks. I know I had a friend who had the brunoise. Brunoise is a very, very small dice cube. It's usually 1/8 by 1/8 by 1/8 of an inch. He had a Brunoise rabbit heart. That was his task. All these there are people who come there. They just peel and cut carrots. That's it.
This is hours and day just doing that. Wow.
But that's it. But the idea is that if you do that, you can work your way up to something else eventually. And also, I mean, you can even just learn through osmosis. You can look at the other stations, see what are they doing, see how the dishes are carried out, take notes, all of that.
That's what I'm saying. A lot of occupations, a lot of situations, people still learn out of experience. I think the world is going to go back to that. I think this aspect
it's already
of
kind
having,
of is.
Yeah. That's why I think the schooling system doesn't really work as much as we can. People thought, this is, you go to school and you're going to be successful. It's like, no, you used to be successful. You used to need to be successful before you could even get into school. The success was measured in a certain way. It was a prerequisite for educational institutions. It wasn't... The educational institution wasn't...
The cart before the horse.
Yeah. So yes.
Because the thing is, too, like, there was a chef I worked for, and one of his bits of parting advice when I quit there was, he said, try to look more around, because the thing is, he's like, you tend to just focus on what you're doing, but the problem is you should be looking at the other stations and so on, because it shows that you want to get ahead, but also you start to learn the material, and then when you work that station, you already have part of it down, and then you don't have to start from the ground up each time. Mm-hmm. You're constantly absorbing information, where, then it's easier to transition. Obviously, there will be a struggle as far as managing all the dishes, managing the prep. That those parts will be a challenge, but if you have an overall idea of how things start to work, you can keep building on that.
Cool.
So, all right.
Back in.
Yep.
Do a sorbet course for you now.
Beet sorbet?
Yuzu sorbet with coconuts. So I have a cucumber
sorbet.
That's
beautiful.
A roasted red pepper sorbet. Beet sorbet. If I didn't test it, I wouldn't believe it.
Like you tell me you're gonna eat beet sorbet, I'm like...
Beet sorbet is fairly common, that's what he's saying.
But this is so good.
This is...
But the way it's better.
Instantly, I realize I'm in a whole other realm. That this guy is thinking things that wouldn't occur to me if I devoted my whole life to coming up with just one of his dishes. What sort of will must it take to accomplish each of these intricate dishes? Thank you.
Okay, to me that's a part that kind of stuck out to me, was that part where he's saying, Max Keller is saying...
Thomas Keller.
Sorry, he's saying that Thomas Keller has this ability to think out things that Bourdain would not be able to think of. And I think that's something you kind of have to think of in so many fields. There's a lot of situations. I had this one experience where I was in high school and one of my friends looked at me and he was like, if I had your body, I would be in the NFL. Because he was a lot shorter, he had a different build, he was slower.
Really skinny guy? Or...
No, he wasn't skinny, but he was a portly guy, but he was shorter. I think he was like 5'4". I don't think he's gotten much taller than that since then.
Right.
But he said that, and it made me think like, I mean, at that time I was like, okay, yeah, because I didn't really have too many. Wasn't as into the sport, but you have to think about, if he was me, then he would also lived where I'd lived. He would also had the different abilities that I would have had. He'd also have the ability to draw, the ability to have other interests, and even having that physical body, he may have had that less. He may have not had enough of a drive to actually think like, I should get better at this aspect of my life. So it's kind of tough to think, what does it do? Even if you put in the same exact situation as somebody else, will you turn out like that person? It's a tough thing.
It's very hard to say. I mean, so many factors go into that, I think.
Like right now, if you took him out of there, Tom Keller out of there, and then you put Bourdain in there, and Bourdain himself is, at this point, I mean, he still is. He's a well-accomplished chef, and he's letting you know that even if I was in that kitchen, there's a lot of things that come together to make Thomas Keller who he is, for him to actually have that end result.
Because the thing is, too, I don't know enough about Bourdain's cooking background. I know he worked in some nicer places, like the Rainbow Room, that's still around. He worked at Windows on the World when the World Trade Center, the Twin Towers were around. The place you saw was Les Halles, which is like a brasserie. It's that same menu they have all day, steak frites, things like that. It's a classical French. It's like a French bistro kind of, but it's that same menu that goes all day. Mm-hmm. But the thing with Keller is he's not only, but he's mostly worked in those very, very refined places. Same thing with Eric Ripert, actually. So he's used to that very refined. Okay, all these components on the dishes, the attention to detail, and I've noticed too from my own experience in the industry that it leads to a different skill set in a sense, because if you work in those higher end places, you learn that attention to detail, the more developed dishes and all that. But then if you work in a busy place, you learn how to crank out a lot of food in a short period of time. So having experience in both can be beneficial because you learn both aspects of that. You learn, okay, how do I get a lot out, but at the same time not taking shortcuts either.
Yeah, one thing I'm wondering is, again, just the mental experience, the ability to do this, knowledge of, because you see he's going through and Stephen can point out which of the dishes are served in a way that he considers really beautiful and really aesthetically pleasing. Aesthetics. But for me, I've never been really that good at placing food. I'm just like, yeah, put the food here and there. But
the dots on the plate that are all the same size, and
with the placing, with the food, with his techniques, does it have something to do with how the food is tasted, how it's actually, or is it more of just the expectation that your mind has when it looks at it? I mean, it is a thing.
Well, they always say you eat with your eyes. It's the first thing. And if you see, I don't know if they show it here, but it's like the heirloom salad. You see all these different colored tomatoes. It looks beautiful on the plate. There is the salad with the frisee on top, but it's the frisee. It's only the very pale parts, which aren't as bitter. The dark green get really bitter to a point where it's unpleasant. Okay. But you see, like I knew someone who worked at, well, he did like an internship at Per Se, and he said you had to pick out all these pieces of frisee that are like that big, and you had to only pick that out, and those had to just lay on top of the plate. But because it's very delicate, but it's still bitterness, but it's the right degree of bitterness where it doesn't overwhelm everything else. And also the way it looks on that plate, that nice bright color.
We may get into this in a later video, but I'm wondering with this presentation thing, there's that one restaurant, or at least there was a time when this seemed to be kind of a trendy thing to have those blind restaurants where you go in and they blindfold you, or it's like pitch black and they have
I've heard about that. Yeah.
So would they really care about going to this level of presentation if you have that kind of restaurant?
Well, probably not. But with this, it's because again, it's not just the presentation; it's also the execution. Like, you know, the meat has a perfect sear on it; it's perfectly seasoned. The fish has a perfectly crispy skin.
Yeah.
The green vegetables still have a little bit of crunch, but are bright green in color and are well seasoned as well. All those little details are carried out well. The sauce, I know the sauces and soups and everything, he strains them out constantly. They're perfectly smooth, no lumps, anything.
Yeah.
But it's that attention to detail. Ice cream, probably no ice crystals in them. They churn them very slowly, use them that day. All those little details that all those little details work in tandem, everything's outstanding.
Yeah, so think about that. Like,
whereas if you take shortcuts, I mean, you think about with your drawings or something, if you focus a lot on one thing but something else is sloppy, well, the whole thing looks bad.
Yeah.
But if you focus on all those little details, wow, that looks really good.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a thing to consider when you're taking in information, when you're taking in food, when you're presenting something to somebody. Think about their appearance. Like, all of a sudden, if I was doing this whole video with like pencils in my hair like this, would you take this the same way if this is how I started this, or if we kept jumping back and forth with that things? So yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing.
If I had a hat that said dope on it or something,
or if our voices just switched all of a sudden, what would your expectation be, or if we were like little 8-year-old girls all of a sudden? I don't know why I jumped to that, but yeah, back in.
Take your time, chef. Make them perfect.
From the stories I've heard, there is no extent to which he wouldn't go to achieve his ideal. If he thought it would increase your dining pleasure to have one of his staff carve a relief of the Acropolis into each and every fava bean, he might well do it.
Please look at my face. I'm just so beyond happy that I think I promised you stunned silence. So far, so good.
I'm beginning to realize this is going to take a while. I've been warned. Keller told me earlier, don't eat, and I obeyed. I'm on board for the full ride. I'll eat whatever he sends for as long as he sends it. I wonder if I'll get a cigarette break.
We're doing a special custard for Tony.
Okay, this is a bit ill.
How'd you make it? Marlboro cigarettes crunched up into cream custard with foie gras. No, that's his cigarette stick. We never made that before, and we made it in his honor.
It's a new custard the chef came up with tonight. It's a coffee custard infused with Marlboro tobacco. Served with foie gras mousse.
Good. I needed a shot around now. Thank you. You know, I'm a degenerate smoker. This embarrassed the hell out of me, but it was utterly delightful. It's terrific. Marlboro infused coffee custard. I did get a nice nicotine buzz off it, and it tasted delicious.
Okay.
But this is actually, I was going to say too, this is where what I was mentioning earlier about Keller's style of cooking, where you see coffee and cigarettes. Okay, that's a cliche, but it's how do I make a creative take on that? And that was the idea.
And you think they kind of work together? Because a lot of people who have the fixes for coffee also get it from cigarettes. You
The buzz,
the same buzz is there, the nicotine relationship there. Why didn't he go with like cigarettes and cocoa? Because cocoa and coffee. So he's thinking that. I think he's seeing that connection there. But it's two things on that. First, I'll ask you can think about this. What's the oddest kind of dish you've had besides durian or combination in this kind of sense there? But before you get to that, the people out there, let me ask you people, the people who smoke, I used to smoke, quit smoking, find it really ill right now.
Yeah.
But one thing I never understood was people who could smoke while eating or like between meals, like they take a break. Like he right here was talking about actually going out and smoking a cigarette and then coming back in. That smell stays with you. Why do you do that? So the people who do that, I'm asking why. Why?
Because I figured it was just the addiction. But the thing is, you work in most decent places. They expect you. If you go out and smoke, you either have to brush your teeth, have a mint or something. Like the diners cannot smell you at all. Like you have to go out back usually. Then they're like, okay, go in the back and brush your teeth or have a mint. And in some way cover up that smell, because you go to a high-end restaurant, somebody's waiting on you, they're breathing, and you smell that. I mean, that's horrible. I mean, it's bad in general, but especially at that level.
So yeah, you're the oddest meal combination that you've had.
That's hard to say. I mean, durian, like you say. Let me think. I mean, I'm pretty adventurous. I mean, I like foie gras. That's kind of out there to a lot of people. A lot of issues with that as far as the way it's raised and so on. But that's a separate topic, of course.
We can come back to it. Okay, another thing, definitely the palate thing. That's another thing with the smoking. It changes your palate. It changes your.
You need more
to
salt,
taste
right?
some things, yes. And I'm also wondering with a simple thing, like for me, when I go on a ketogenic cycle, which the ketogenic diet is high fats, low carbs, decent amount of protein, but you take out sugars, you take out salts, refined foods, and you taste different flavors in different ways once you've done this. So I think was part of this food thing. There are different situations where genetically some people will have better taste buds than other people. Just like you'll have some pianists who their fingers actually work better. You see like some basketball players. I think they said with Shaquille O'Neal, he had like some kind of shorter tendon in his wrist or something that actually made him a lot worse at shooting free throws. So it wasn't just like he could practice tons and tons. Like
he wasn't incompetent. It was just he was crippled by.
Couldn't have that.
Or like what I was mentioning, I think in our first video about Bill Whittle with his vision, he can fly a plane, but it has to be a small plane that goes, I think, like 200 miles an hour. He can't fly a jet fighter that goes Mach 5 or I mean I don't know enough about it, but
because I think you'd love that.
But that's the thing. But he also acknowledges that this is my limitation. However, I can still work with it to an extent, and I'm happy knowing that even with my limitation, I can still.
And I think that's a good thing when at least when I talk about differences and changes, and I think there's a lot of people who recoil to some of these things. People talking about IQ differences, height differences, differences to illnesses, like
ability to handle stress. Yeah.
Some people will die from a peanut. Some people eat a peanut and put on massive mass and protein. So it's not necessarily saying these differences make people less of a person. It just says this is what you can do and this is what you can't. It's good to know your specs.
Yeah.
But yeah, Bill Whittle, there'll be a link to some of his stuff. He's an amazing guy. Yeah. All right.
Marble Man? Let me see that.
And also just interesting to think how much smoking has changed the acceptance of it.
Yeah. He quit smoking after his daughter was born, actually.
That's a good
He wanted to set a good example.
I expected the flavors to be a little shyer than they are. They're much, they're assertive. He's not shy about flavor.
No. Why would you think that they're
Because the portions are so refined. God help us.
I was going to say that's actually a big theme of Keller's cooking at both Per Se and the French Laundry. Not some of his lower end places, but these is that they want small portions because they want you to get that full impact of flavor, the right salt, the right acidity, and so on. The idea is, oh wow, that's really good, I want more of it, but then you're on to the next course. Because he says in his book that part of the problem is that if you have a big portion of something, at first it's great. It's like listening to a song. At first it's great, but then it becomes okay, and then it's, okay, I'm tired of this. And it's the same thing with a portion. But then some chefs will try to work around that by putting a ton of things on one plate, but then the flavors get confused and they There, like, contrast can be a good thing, but at that point it's more like confusion. The idea with this is you focus on a few things, you get that impact, it's, wow, I want more of this, and then, okay, next course.
Do they have a palate cleanser between it? Like...
The sorbet is usually a palate cleanser, that's one. Usually there's something, it's called an intermezzo in Italian too, if you may have heard. There's usually something that's kind of acidic, the idea is it cuts through the fat in the palate. And the amuse-bouche too, the first course, it's usually something pretty strong, usually a little acidic, or it's something just to wake up that palate that way, and then you have lighter followed by heavier things as time goes on. Because the fat coats the palate, so if you have steak first, everything else is going to be dull by comparison.
This is a marathon event. After 3 hours, we're only halfway through nearly 20 courses and 7 bottles of wine. Keller's tasting menu is many, many small courses and intensely flavored items. Just enough to surprise and delight, then leave you wanting more.
We have the pasta course.
He actually prefers agnolotti. It's the, for those that don't know, it's the Piedmont version of ravioli. And with ravioli, of course, it's different because you make that sheet and you punch them out. With the agnolotti, you roll out a line of dough and then you just cut down each piece. So it's cool because they kind of, the way when you cut them, it basically seals them up. But then you have these nice little pillows here.
First on the tasting menu, we're serving the English pea agnolotti. We have the hand-cut tagliatelle and a grate some hardware truffle.
To be fair, can you hold that magnificent beast right up to the lens? I mean, look at the size of this thing.
That was truffle, for those who don't know, the most expensive food per gram in the world right now, I think. Yeah.
Well, depending.
Saffron
I mean,
might be.
Caviar is probably up there, but I mean, like, a white truffle from Italy, I want to say, is something like $2,000 to $3,000 a pound.
Yeah.
The black one are cheaper. They're probably like $500-600 a pound. Obviously not cheap, but by comparison. But I think with the white ones, they're only in season. It's something like October to December or something, and then with the black ones, it's like you have winter truffles, which are the stronger ones, and then summer you have milder ones. But the milder ones, obviously, they lack the flavor. Some chefs will cheat and put a little truffle oil on them to try and make them appear stronger, but that's not good, obviously. Or the other thing they'll do is they'll freeze the winter truffles and just use them all year. That's the other thing.
And they normally use pigs or dogs to sniff them out and dig them out. And yeah, it's one of the weird things. For some people, it's an excellent thing, but for me, that's one of the few foods that actually gives me some intense migraine of sorts, like when I actually smell the smell of truffles. But yeah, what's the connection? Why do they call the chocolate things truffles?
Because they look like truffles out of the ground. That's originally what they were modeled after.
Okay.
I was wondering that too, but they said that I guess somebody's like, hey, I want to come up with a chocolate dessert. Hey, it looks like the truffles out of the ground, and there you go. That's why chocolate truffles. Yeah.
This is amazing. As each course arrives, I'm nearly giddy with delight. It's still trying to look cool for my chef pals. Squealing at the table and clapping my hands just wouldn't do. I'm a New Yorker, for God's sake. I have a reputation for cynicism to live up to.
The garnish, this is dried or fresh? Cut fresh?
I think it's dried.
But it's hard to stay cynical at the French Laundry about anything. I feel like Keller is really playing with our minds.
Finally, we have the Atlantic salmon chops.
Salmon chop. Fiendish. There aren't chops on a fish.
This is what I had mentioned earlier. I think it was the chef David Barkey cited for this. What he does is it's towards the end. If you picture a salmon fillet, how it's wide and then it sort of tapers off at the end. There's something at the end where you peel the skin back and then you crisp it up a certain way so it looks like a bone, like on a chop, like a pork chop, lamb or whatever. And you can only use pieces on the end, so it's the rest of the loin you have to use for something else. But if you have enough of those, you can do a few of those dishes. Pretty cool.
Cool.
He's got the chop. Are you the one asking about the chop?
Don't even look at my chop. Forget about it.
He's made one. Perfect example of the master at work. Just
Foie gras.
gorgeous. Who would think of this stuff? I wouldn't.
The only criticism I have, I want like one of each.
Yeah. Caviar course, John. Chef, for you, we have a panna cotta, lightly cooked cream, cauliflower mousse.
So this is what he does to an oyster.
Caviar. We have a pickled bologna oyster. This is a gratin.
Each course is an almost bittersweet experience. I know I could.
So you saw what he did there. The pickled oyster, obviously, he pickled it. I'm not sure his exact recipe, but then gratin. Gratin in French roughly translates, I think, like with a crust. So like potato gratin, you have the breadcrumbs on top and so on, and then you have the. I know he'll do raw oysters as well, but like he'll take that same dish and just prepare it different ways. Of course, caviar. I think the caviar. I forget if it's supplemental on their menu or it's included. A lot of places it's supplemental just because how expensive it is. So.
Never have done what Thomas Keller.
And that's the thing. It's like, even if you had the money, would you do this? You know, that's the kind of thing. You're watching this. I was also thinking, like, okay, we're watching this. Is there that aspect of this is such a bougie situation? Like, this is such just like a first world rich people thing. Like, is this kind of like, why are they even doing this? You know?
Well, again, I mean, I know I've made this example like 5 times already, but like, you know, it's like the car thing. It's like, you know, even if you have the money, like, I know people who have money who would say, oh, I don't feel inclined to buy a Ferrari. I could, but I don't see it's just not worth it to me. And I think because them, and for me too, because we worked in the industry, we see what chefs go through, we see the level of work that goes into this. I think that's why we appreciate it, at least from my perspective anyway. I mean, there are a lot of people who eat out, of course, who think they know everything they don't. But, I mean, I think if you worked in the industry, you know how hard it is to work in a professional kitchen. You know, getting all these moving parts going and working the right way, just how much attention to detail, how much effort, how much focus, all that. And it's when you can see that transform into something beautiful, it's just wow. I mean,
yeah, I'm trying to think. Okay, think about the things you spend a lot of money with. Not, I think, besides main electronics and things that you use on a regular basis, but I'd say more luxury or optional items that you. This is a question for you guys listening. Think about the things that you spend the most on that you don't necessarily have to. How much do you know about how that thing is prepared? Is that something that's in a field or in an area that you're familiar with? Or is part of that value coming from something that you don't really understand?
Because I was going to say,
interesting thing to think.
I think about that a lot with clothes, where like to me, I might see a designer suit and I think, oh, that looks nice, but I can't in my own mind explain, okay, why is this more than this one? Yeah. But then somebody else will say, oh, well, that's an Armani suit, that's a designer brand, it has these characteristics, and then of course tailored, obviously, it's meant to fit you. Whereas if you just go and pick something off a rack, it's not going to fit ideally. So it's all those factors going into it. But
yeah, and I think that's it's a good point. It's one thing that why I'm asking you to ask this for yourself is also think about it in the media, in the kind of information you're taking in. The people you are assuming know what they're talking about, know about curating this. The people you are assuming are actually still doing an up to par job of finding the best quality information. Mm-hmm. Is that really still the case? You know, like, yeah. Let's say you've only been to McDonald's and Burger King, and then you make the comparison between the two restaurants, and then you say, okay, yes, Burger King makes the best burger, and that's the best way burgers are done. Whereas there's Five Guys, there's other restaurants that have
White
actual
Castle.
burgers and things like that. Yeah, so there might be a wider range of different. There might be more options for you to actually select from. So think about how well you are at estimating how good something is. Yeah. Yeah.
It hurts to look at other plates. It's a humbling experience to be confronted with every bite by one's own limitations.
Yukon Gold potato blini with shiitake mushrooms and chive butter.
That's actually really cool what he does here. It's pepper confetti. What he does is he dries out. He takes pepper, he cuts it up into strips, puts it usually in a drier, hot, warm place, like usually above the oven or something, and just breaks up the pieces. So you have like red, green, yellow. It's fairly simple, but it looks beautiful on that plate, the design.
There's an impish humor that runs through this whole menu. He's using a lot of old, lumbering, classic terms with very, very new presentations. Lobster Navarin. Navarin is generally lamb shoulder. He's coupling a lot of words with foods that are not traditionally done this way.
Wow.
And these are mostly French techniques.
Yes.
Naked in mink underpants. Just so over the top.
It's pretty hammered by this point, I'd say.
You're eating this gorgeous food and you can sense.
I think what's the future version of vaping going to be for alcohol?
So we're going to do 2 more meat courses for you.
This is the shoulder of the Bellwether Farm baby lamb, spring lamb. We'll get these for the next 2 months, and that's it. I just think this is phenomenal.
Bellwether Farm's baby lamb. We're serving the rack, the saddle, braised shoulder, and the kidney with the sauce.
Different parts of the lamb on the same dish.
After eating this, because it just ain't gonna get any better.
Selection of salts here, gentlemen.
Sure.
A couple from the island of Maui here, from the same clay pool there. The darker of the two has a higher minerality.
How much more luxurious do you get than being offered a selection of salts?
And finally, Jurassic salt from Montana.
That's the thing, the luxuries, that's what I meant. What are the luxuries that you spend your money on?
I mean, I eat out fairly. I usually eat out like once a week or something. I like to have a nice meal here and there. As far as that, I mean, I don't spend much else as far as luxuries. I mean, I dress pretty modestly. I don't, obviously I don't own a car. It's just like, for me, I think everyone kind of has that thing they want to spend money on. Like I have a few friends, as I mentioned, who are into cars, and for him, he spends a lot of money on car parts because he wants to work on other things. And you could say that's a luxury. He doesn't need that. But for him, he's passionate about that thing, so he spends money on it. Again, somebody with clothes, it's like you don't have to buy designer clothes, but you see a value in it, so you're willing to spend the money. I mean, you could just go to Kmart and buy the cheapest things, but there's a reason you're not doing that.
And at the same point, people who value the same things you value as luxuries will look at you like somebody could be into like the shoe game, and if they see you with certain Jordans, they may be attracted to you for that. Yet somebody may consider something like Jordans to be a frivolous use of your money, and then they may see you with that and have a negative reaction to that. So
yeah,
this is another interesting thing about the signals that you send out by what you consume and what you display to people.
For example, someone I used to work with, I won't mention the name here, but she put up a hashtag on one of her posts. She wrote, "The shoes make the woman," and I was just like, I don't think I've ever read anything that shallow.
But then I was thinking about that. This video I'm going to do about that. I have a script of it where it's like, they say that clothes make the man.
Yeah.
But they kind of do in a sense.
In a sense.
There was this Dave Chappelle skit where he's like, yeah, it's like going to. It's like going up, like you're being accosted by somebody. Somebody's like trying to rob you, and then you run up to somebody who's dressed as a cop, walking around with a badge on, and then you say, "Can you help me, officer?" And the guy's like, "Just because I'm dressed like a cop doesn't mean I am a cop." And they are a certain situation. And that's a thing we have to wonder, like, when does something? Is just the appearance of that thing versus the content of the thing. Like, when is a chop? Just like we're talking about the Solomon chop. It looks like a chop, but is it a chop?
It doesn't have a bone attached to it like that.
But the appearance is of a chop, so you can call it a chop, and then what's really...
Or Navarone being lamb shoulder, obviously a lobster doesn't really have a shoulder, it just has the claw.
So it's a difficult thing when you're talking about race, when you're talking about black culture, white culture. What does white mean? How much is it appearance? How much is it the content? What are the things? So it's an interesting thing.
I always make the point to people, it's funny with my mixed European background, I say if I lived 100 years ago I wouldn't be considered white. They would say, no, you're a mix because you have Italian and Polish blood, you have Mediterranean Slavic heritage, you're not one of us. Not
even 100 years ago. Let's think about it right now. Do you really consider Scandinavian people, Icelandic people to be the same peoples as
I'm saying
Sicilians?
I'm saying people. No, I'm saying people generalized, but those are different people. Obviously, skin tone, hair color, eye color as general trends. But it's like today people use white just to mean European, but in the past they would have said, "Oh no, you're you're Sicilian, you're not white. You're white if you're Dutch or English or Scandinavian."
One is nice. They're interesting, but the gray salt is... I guess it's because my palate...
The soups, the seafood, the pastas, the meats. Keller dazzles on every level, physically and emotionally. I almost feel like weeping.
I love that green.
I'm not sure how much more of this I can handle.
So, let's guess how much more is coming.
It's worried.
Several desserts.
Exceeded my expectations. Amazing. He's not compromising anything.
When we were looking at him in the kitchen from outside, we could see it. We were far away. We could see a happy man. What is the value of that feeling? Being happy.
How many chefs get to work in a kitchen like this with a staff like this, with the products that we have? We're just really lucky.
And the thing is, people who worked for Keller have said this too. He's a very humble guy. Like, apparently he goes around and shakes everybody's hand, and that's why I've complained. Like, I've had managers who won't say hi to me or other people, like even just staff in general. And the thing is, this is a guy who's considered by a lot of people to be the best chef in America, but he'll go up and shake the dishwasher's hand and all that. Like, the level of humble, like how humble he is. He's like, look, I started here. I always have something to learn, and he always says things like, "Oh, I'm lucky," and I think he referred to himself as a recognized chef. Like, recognized is obviously really understated, but it's that philosophy of striving for perfection, but realizing perfection's unattainable. Like, keep pushing. What's that next level? What can I improve on? What can I build on? And I think And that's why he's humble. And it's interesting, too, because people have said his temperament in his kitchen is he doesn't scream, but they said he gives you this look that'll send a shiver down your spine.
And there's this thing, there's a double aspect to that, where it's like, not a double aspect, but there's different layers to that, different things to consider, where in a lot of fields, he doesn't have to be humble and nice. That might have something to do with how he keeps he keeps his crew, he keeps people coming back to his restaurant. But when it comes down to it, even if he was more of a
bully,
yes, if he was more of a bully, if he was more negative of a person, and he still could provide, he could still create these dishes, people would still come. People would still want to work with him. But it would just change the kind of people that might want to work with him. Different work environments and different situations, different people do different things. But it comes to, like, what is the end goal? Can he cook? Can he make these dishes?
But I was going to say, you just touched on something important. You talked about retaining staff, and I've seen this in my own experience too. You have to find a way to motivate your staff, and there are people who you can yell at and they'll respond to it. Other people, I'm more the type that has to be reasoned with. But the point is, if you get that staff around and they keep improving, the place gets better and better. You can establish consistency, and then you can build on that, and then over time the food gets better and better. Because I think I mentioned a place I used to be at where it was a top place, and then a lot of the people left and went kind of downhill because you had that crew there that just kept getting better and better over time, and then they left and you had to train all new people. And unfortunately, that's the reality sometimes when people move on, people have other opportunities. But being able to retain people that keep improving, you keep motivating them, that's how the place does well, because you have that strong foundation. Whereas if you see your employees more as interchangeable parts that you can just swap out on a whim, they're going to be inconsistencies, they're going to be people who walk out, they're going to be people who don't show up, and then of course you have to work extra to make up for that, and it's really hard to work to that next level if that's what you're doing.
Yeah,
because that foundation is flawed.
Yeah, which is why I don't mind people at the top. There was this video on the Google situation, which somebody got fired for, I don't know exactly the reason why he got fired. We can speculate on that, but a memo came out about certain practices, got released to the public. I don't mind people making jobs about more than just the results. I want to see which companies work better by focusing on mostly on results. The results, let's say you're like 80% of it is about if you can get X thing done.
Yeah.
Some other companies might want to say that's only 50%, and most of it is, do we have a right environment, a right number of female energy or different representation from different backgrounds. If that's what they want to focus on, that might create an entirely different product that we don't know about. So I want to see a situation where you have as many companies, as many people with the ability to tailor activities, businesses, products in an environment where their vision can best create what they want, and we can see what happens out there.
And I've actually said too, one of the best things about working in a kitchen is, like, they always talk about white privilege and all that, but it's a relatively colorblind industry, because it's like you can go behind that line, you can be an old white man, you can be a young Mexican, you can be a black girl, it doesn't matter. If you can put out that nice food, you're going to rise up through the ranks.
Yeah.
And that's why in recent years you started to see some more female chefs. Of course, there are a lot of chefs from Central and South America because of the population, the demographic change. A lot of that food's becoming more popular. So it's like, if you can put out a product that people want, I mean, it doesn't matter where you're from or what your background is, and I think that's really good in a way. It's not like modeling or something where, oh, you have to look a certain way and that's it. No, if you can come up with the right food, you can develop leadership skills and all that. I mean, you could be a Keller, whatever your background may be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really lucky, and I don't forget that.
It's all about integrity, quality, food, product,
intent, and
talent. I mean,
While this is all true, I'm just thinking one thing. I can't eat another bite, and the waiter is setting out dessert forks.
reflection of the personality.
I think we're all thinking the same thing.
The stomach is like
That being said, I can't relate to this because there's no black eaters. There's not a sufficient number of black eaters or female eaters. All the different race palettes are not represented.
Which is a problem, because back in the kitchen, they're just putting the finishing touches on a whole fleet of desserts.
What you just saw was the coffee and donuts. What that is, I actually made that at home. It was kind of cool. It's a coffee semi-freddo. A semi-freddo is a partially frozen mousse, but he dumps the hot milk foam over it. So the idea is, like, you're kind of recreating a cappuccino, but like you scoop it together, you have that hot and cold contrast. It's nice. And the donut's just pretty much a typical donut, but he has the hole followed by the the round. So I think you can still get that at Per Se, actually. That's one of his signature dishes.
A bunch of stuff tonight that I've never seen before. This particular course, yeah?
They start us off easy.
Mini presentation of the coffee nuts.
This is a signature dish. It's been on the menu since day one.
Yeah.
Then they just go nuts.
No.
Chocolate ravioli filled with the sauteed bananas. French laundry ice cream with the chocolate tuile.
Salt on the chocolate too.
Crepe Suzette served with lemongrass ice cream.
Yeah, crepe Suzette, that's a classic French dish. It's usually made with... Some people use Grand Marnier, but I think originally it was Cointreau. It's flambéed like that. So, of course, it was his take on that.
Lime sorbet served with Hass avocado.
House
I don't
avocado.
get it. It's way over my head. Granted, I'm not that bright.
Strawberry and rhubarb.
We've been beat, but we flew all this way and we're not missing a bite. I wanted the food to look like it did in the book, and it does. We all agree the experience is absolute perfection. Well, not everyone agrees.
Perfection is something that you never actually attain. It's only something you search for. Because once you reach it, it's not perfect. You've lost it. It's gone. It can never be perfect.
And I was going to say, Joël Robuchon, I think I mentioned him in a previous video. He's considered by a lot of people the best in the world. He's one of the French masters. His philosophy is the same. And I think he has... I don't know if he has the most Michelin stars in total, but I think he's one of the ones up there. Alain Ducasse, he's another French guy. He's up there as well. I think Robuchon has like 24 or something, which is crazy. I mean, even getting one is a big deal, but he has all these places. He has Robuchon in Paris that has 3 stars. He has a place in Tokyo. I think that's 3 stars as well. He has one in Vegas. It's all over the place. He's famous for his pomme puree or mashed potatoes.
Pomme puree sounds more classy than mashed potatoes.
Well, like he's big on the attention to detail there too. Like for example, he uses fingerling potatoes. Those are the little ones for people that don't know. He likes the starch content in them. He adjusts the recipe of fat depending when in the season they grow because the potatoes have more or less starch depending on how warm or cold the weather is. He's big on cooking them gently. He cooks them with the skin on. That way they retain a lot of the flavor from the skin. Then they peel them off. Because a lot of people will peel the skin and then throw them in the pot, but he does the reverse. Cook them gently. I know, of course, fold cream and butter, and I know he pushes them through a tammy. That's a very fine mesh sieve. Like he takes they take the little I forget what it's called. It's a little thing you use to press it through, but that way it's this ultra fine. And that's they said if you work in Robuchon place, that's one of the tasks for the new cooks. And it's funny, it's so much fat folded in, the potatoes soak it up, but it's not so much that it breaks where the fat kind of bleeds out. It's really, he has it all down in this really exact science.
See, and there's an interesting thing about this, the way you're talking about these top practitioners in the field of cooking. I've heard a few similar things from in the artist field, in the more visual arts field, where they say, okay, painting is never really completely done. It's kind of get to the point where is it enough to convey the message that you're trying to convey? And then there's another short quote that was to me thinking, okay, the end, because I always wonder, okay, when do you actually finish? Sometimes I'll be drawing something, someone will see it and be like, oh, that's really good, and then I'll be like, okay, the image I had in my mind was a lot better than this. It was like moving around and doing all these things, so I'm limited in what I can there. But if it gets to the point where somebody tells me, oh, I can see this, and then I'm like, okay, at least I've accomplished that. And another aspect was the other end of it, where somebody was like, okay, I don't know if the person actually meant this, but he was like, he wants to be able to draw, like when he's talking about figure drawing, he wanted to be able to draw a figure of somebody in the time it took them to fall from like a 5-story building. So just have the basic amounts. What's the lowest amount that you need for something to be something? And then what's kind of an aspect where you can be like, okay, now that we've passed here, oh, this is the top aspect. So there's the entry level of saying, okay, now you've achieved this figure, but then that doesn't mean that you can't add a lot of things to whatever field that you're on.
Well, I think as you saw with the cooking here, it's all these little details. Like for example, you can make smashed potatoes at home, throw the potatoes in the pot, pull them out, put in some cream butter, mash them up, there you go. But then with Robuchon, it's all that attention to detail, adjusting based on the starch content in the potatoes, cooking them very gently, cooking with the skin on, straining them out, all, again, like, I know Keller's big on straining all his soups and sauces. Like they said, even transferring between containers, like skimming the fat off the surface. All those little details that if you're paying that much for food, that you better have all that completed.
Yeah, and that's also I think why some of these processed foods you find all these chemicals and all these other aspects into it, because they're trying to achieve that level of consistency where if you just were getting different products, different produce, you'd be having different levels of flavors. But when somebody goes to McDonald's, when you go buy a can of soup from like your progressor, your favorite person, why does each can have that same flavor? Because in some cases, they just take a basic product. They might say, okay, we're going to get potatoes only from this one farm, but they don't go into the level of saying the fat content, how long it was grown, but they just have some set system. Then through that processing system, they add chemicals, they add certain things to level out the flavor and maintain a certain appearance, certain flavor. And when you're doing it on such a massive scale, there's going to be
this Swiss chef in school was talking about cheeses and how it's interesting because a lot of Americans try European cheeses for the first time. They say, oh my god, these are too strong. But then with a lot of Europeans, they try American cheeses and they say they have no flavor.
Yeah.
But then
they don't, by the way.
Well, yeah, like Kraft singles and all that.
Yeah.
But what he's saying, the point is that in America, it's okay, you put cheese on the shelf, you have to make it last. You have people working in supermarkets who don't really care. You have to be able to put it on the shelf. It has to be able to sit there for time long enough for them to sell it. So you have to triple pasteurize it. You have to ultra homogenize it, all that. Whereas in Europe, you have a lot of villages where it's, okay, everybody's making cheese all the time. If something goes bad, you just throw it out. Okay, you have more. And you also have all these individual producers that they just focus on that. So they're going to take that attention to detail and so on. Like, I remember learning, I think it was Roquefort, it's the blue cheese. It's actually aged in cliffs by the sea. And that sea air blowing into it, that's something that helps determine its flavor. But there's that attention to detail. And again, it's like, you know, they sell it pretty quickly. You know, it doesn't have to be pasteurized. You eat it, it's not going to go bad because you're eating it like right around when it's produced. It's not going to sit on a shelf for weeks on end.
Yeah. Before we get off the topic of cheese, for any of you who think mozzarella is a string cheese, I'm not saying string cheese isn't good, but find out what bufala mozzarella is.
Oh, I've had it.
You will be glad to have found that out.
I'm
not going to spoil for you. Don't talk about it. Just find it. Okay, let's get into this.
Sure.
The stars.
You have a very evil streak. That the tobacco thing was very shrewd and brilliant.
Brilliant and disgusting.
We had a good time.
We had a good time, he says.
Yeah, we were all like little kids on Halloween looking in from the outside for a moment there. Eating here and meeting Thomas Keller has changed the way I look at food. It's also bittersweet. It's made me a little sad to think of all the things I've missed. But mostly, I've learned what's possible. It was great.
Yeah, there was even a point earlier in the discussion where there was even a point earlier in the discussion where Ruhlman actually says that, because I think this was before the French Laundry cookbook came out. I think the French Laundry opened in '94 or so, and Ruhlman actually said when he ate there that completely redefined the way he saw food, and that's why he wanted to write the book with Keller.
Good. Yeah, so that was our talk on French Laundry experience with Anthony Bourdain. Any thoughts or overview that you want to give?
Not really. I mean, I'm hoping my friends in the industry, you guys all enjoyed it. Anyone else who's just interested in food, I always tell people, I mean, I think, like with a lot of things, I think Keller is one of those people that even if you're just into cooking, even on a casual level, I mean, he's definitely someone, he's the kind of person you feel inspired, I think, listening to and learning from. Not just his food, but just his leadership skills, how humble he is, his drive for perfection, just all around. I mean, there are a lot of things that even if you don't cook professionally, I think there are a lot of things people can take from that.
Yeah, and now if you look at this, what do you think was the worth of it? If you guys out there watching this video, if you hadn't been familiar with something like this, if somebody was like, okay, this meal was $200 or was $300 or was $400, what would your experience be to, like, do you think it's worth it? Do you think it's a waste of money? How much money would you have access to think this was something you'd want to do, want to partake in?
And how often would you do it? Like I think I said in a previous video too, like even if you have money, people don't eat like this. So people with money even don't eat like this all the time, because a lot of times people just want to have their meal, go out, do something else. They don't want to sit down for 4 or 5 hours. But every now and then you have that special experience where you do that. But if you're into food enough, it's worth it to sit down for that long, even once in a while, just because. Yeah, I mean, again, it's just the experience of the whole thing. It's not just eating food to get through the day.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll think of a new topic for the next one. I'm thinking between, I've mentioned this, I think, in a previous talk, the Shokugeki no Soma, which is this cooking manga that's really good. I'm going to send it to Stephen and have him look at a couple of those to see if that would be interesting for a topic, or to talk about Iron Chef or more in the food technology.
Sure.
Any ideas of stuff?
Not at the moment, but I mean, we can definitely think of some.
Okay. Well, I've enjoyed the time. Thanks for watching the video.
Yeah, thank you all. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and we'll have some more coming soon.
Okay. Like, share, and subscribe. There's going to be some links below, and that's it for now. And goodbye.
See you soon.